We're back one more time with the Hearthstone Global Games, and once again, Softool has some news for you.
Yeah, good news this time. In fact, we can flip it. Our problems are resolved. We've found our way around the maintenance, and we are good to go with the Hearthstone Global Games. Day 3 of week 2, Falcone.
Thought I'd give you a chance to redeem yourself after you ruined the broadcast earlier.
Ruined and saved all in one go.
Yeah, we have 3 really exciting games coming up today, starting with Australia, Canada. Let's take a look. After that, we've got Hong Kong, Malaysia, and then Taiwan, Thailand.
Yeah, and I do enjoy now that we get to handle these day 3s from the EU office, if you want to look at it that way, because the teams that play in this time zone were handled over in the US last year. And again, this is a scene that we just naturally don't get as much exposure to over in Europe. So these are teams that I'm really fascinated to learn more about and to watch play more. And we've got some great games coming up, both on stream and off stream.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really great year for that, all in all, I think. For us, having experience of those regions, there's been tour stops that we've been able to experience and get to know some of the players from across the seas. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. It's a different experience all around. It's a different vibe here in the Global Game Studio. It's the middle of the night, and we are just ready to watch some Hearthstone. Should we take a look at the format for the Hearthstone Global Games this year? We're starting with 6 rounds of Swiss, followed by 3-round dual tournament, and finally the top 8 teams will face off at BlizzCon.
Yeah, if you haven't been watching too much of HGG so far, the difference from last year is that Swiss opener, which, you know, Swiss is the players' format, it's the one they want to play, and then that phase 2 is the real big difference, because last year we kind of ran back this original group stage that we had again, and, you know, it kind of dragged on for a little bit. Now we have a much more concise format, a much more meaningful feeling format for that second phase. Yeah,
I completely agree. And let's take a look at how this format's going so far for the teams. Let's take a look at the standings. Top 16 players there. Still just 2-0s, obviously, on the left side, but the the leading players are starting to narrow down week by week. We're going to see the elite appearing at the top left there.
Yeah, Ukraine, definitely one of the expected teams to be in that 2-0. China, maybe you could have predicted as well, but some names in there like Belarus leading the way, presumably on tiebreakers there if they've been given the top spot. Not one of the teams you would have expected to go 2-0. And speaking of that, there's some teams that you wouldn't have expected to go 0-2 either. Chief amongst which are the USA, but of course Japan as well. We've talked a lot about, you know, what an improved region they are. I don't want to say improving anymore. I think we can upgrade them to improved at this point. Really strong region within the Asian scene.
But on the right side there were all of the teams yet to play, and by the end of today's broadcast, we should have all of the results for week 2 of the Hearthstone Global Games. We're starting with 2 series that are the teams are 0-1 at the moment, and then eventually we've got Thailand versus Taiwan. They're 1-0. These 0-1 games are important though, because in order to get through to the next stage of the tournament, the teams are going to want to end the Swiss on 4-2, I believe.
Yes, which means, you know, 0-2, you can still make the comeback from there, but it does require a clean sweep of a 4-0 from that point.
So the first game we've got coming up is Australia versus Canada. Let's take a look at the players that are going to be representing these teams. Monsanto, Purple, Docpone, and the Jaw Dude. That's an all-star lineup for Canada.
It is, yeah. 2 World Championship representatives. Purple, one of the mad geniuses of Hearthstone, really one of the game's great thinkers. Docpone, kind of the wild card of the Canadian team as well. I don't think you really know what to expect from Docpone on any given day, but generally I would give the favourites tag in this one to Canada, although Australia are no slouches of their own. They've got some very well-respected players in the Australian scene, very well regarded both in and out of Australia and the surrounding region, but they haven't quite had the results that the Team Canada members can boast.
Yeah, Canada are going to want to see an improvement this week, though, as they did lose their series last week. They do not want to be joining the USA in the 0-2 bracket. However, the Jaw Dude assured me earlier on today they've put a lot more work into their lineup this week. Apparently, they were sort of handicapped by the fact that HCT Oakland was happening at the same time, so some of the players are a little bit busy for the preparation last week, but this week, they're all in on the Hearthstone Global Games.
Yeah, I mean, schedule conflicts are a real thing that the pro players are having to juggle. I mean, just look at the event now. We're having to handle this 3rd day of HGG all on our own because we have a schedule conflict that's taken our casters away from us. So you can definitely sympathize with the players struggling with, you know, which tournament to prioritize, and sometimes that even then conflicts with like the end of season ladder as well on top of all that. And most people can juggle 2 balls, but adding that 3rd is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see on screen there, Canada is actually one of Raven's 2 picks for
Yeah.
Global Games, which surprised me a little bit. It was one of the final picks in our snake draft, so he didn't have all of the choices.
Right. I think originally it was one of those picks where, Raven said Canada, and we were like, oh, really? Canada? And then you looked at the team and you went, oh, yeah, Canada. That makes sense.
They did very well last year. Let's take a look at the picks and bans for this series. Okay, we're starting to see these rogue bans straight away more and more as the weeks progress. Originally, it was just Druid being banned at the start, then Shadowhawk Shaman started to join in. Why Rogue, Sartor?
Rogue is just very well positioned in the format, whether it's Odd Rogue, Miracle Rogue, Quest Rogue, they all have the ability to kind of just run over some of these slower control decks that you get left with in the format. This is a Miracle Rogue from Australia that's being banned out, which is no great surprise because there's just 4 or 5 decks that you can potentially end up with in the format where Miracle Rogue just preys on them, and you can't pick up enough aggro without your opponent being able to ban them out to really challenge Miracle Rogue consistently like that.
Something really surprising to me as well in this particular picks and bans is that Hunter has been banned on both sides, and also like it was the final ban.
Yes.
So neither of the teams actually chose to play the Hunter. One of the teams even opting to bring Mage before Hunter. Is that something to be expected?
So Death Rattle Hunter is a little bit weaker, I would say, in week 2 than it is in week 1.
Okay.
Because if you look at some of the shifts in the meta, Big Spell Mage was one of the big losers from week 1 to week 2, and it was replaced with Aggro Mages and Murloc Mages.
Okay.
Same thing for the slower types of Rogue being replaced with quicker types of Rogue, and even Quest Rogue coming in there as well. Odd Rogue, again, has a pretty good matchup against Death Rattle Hunter. So when I talk about, Miracle Rogue preying on some of those slower decks, Death Rattle Hunter is even more polarized like that. And because the meta has shifted a little bit away from those slower decks, for me, Death Rattle Hunter is a little weaker in HGG than it was on week 1.
Okay, well, let's find out which games have ended up coming up for these teams, which matchups we've ended up with. We're going to start off with a Warlock mirror of sorts. It's actually Cube Warlock versus Even Warlock. Ginger Ninja, Team Canada on the Even Warlock, and Australia on the Cube Warlock. What can we say about that matchup, Sartor?
It's Evenlock generally has an advantage just because they're a little bit quicker. The first giant is huge in that matchup, and it used to be that in a Warlock mirror, whichever player was going first got to play the first Mountain Giant. Well, Evenlock gets to play the first Mountain Giant whether they have coin or not. Right. They either go first playing it on turn 4, or if they're on coin, they can play it a whole turn earlier on turn 3, and they hit it more consistently because of that extra life tap on turn 1.
And these decks don't have any early way of removing these large giants either, so it sort of is just a case of whoever sticks the first giant wins.
Yeah, it does often come down to it. I will say, if Cublock can stabilize, if they can contest that first giant 1-for-1 and then they do get to stabilize, then they can take over the game with kind of like a more explosive mid game. But they also struggle because they can't really be rewarded for aggression in the way that Evenlock can.
Sure.
Evenlocks actually have a punish for being hit in the face by giants early in the game. They can drop Hooked Reavers as 7/7s quicker, whereas there's really no punish at all for the giant on the opposing side of the board hitting face. So Evenlock just has a more clear game plan.
And then the end game for Cublock is often just, okay, now I've got Void Lords and Void Walkers. What are you going to do about this? And the Evenlock says, well, they're 1/3s.
Not much, yeah. Forget about them.
And I can see 2 giants on one side of the board and none on the other side. Interestingly, though, it's the Cublock that has the giants.
Yes.
So if Monsanto can't draw himself, his own mountain giants by turn 3, maybe we're going to have a problem there.
Right, and crucially, not just the 2 giants, but the other 2 cards are not bad as well. Faceless Manipulator can become a 3rd giant here, and Doomsayer can break that dynamic that I talked about right at the start, because Australia can now play that on their turn 3, potentially, blocking the first play of giant from Canada, and then take over initiative themselves.
I'm just waiting to see which card Monsanto ended up with, because this seems to be pretty decisive. Well, there's the Hooked Reaver you were talking about. So there's the punish for a couple giant hits, but that's no good if Ginger Ninja has 2 8/8s on the board.
Right.
And Monsanto can't actually deal with those. Is there a clever way that Canada can use their Doomsayer to buy some time?
There is. I mean, what I just said of Australia is true of the other side as well, but it only really helps if you then have the giant or at least a Twilight Drake to tempo out after that. If it's just Doomsayer to buy yourself 1 turn, yes, you get 1 more life tap, but it's really not buying you any board tempo. Well, let's get to tapping.
Yep. There really aren't many other options here.
Job done.
It's not the one.
Now I suspect this will be a life tap turn again, and then the Doomsayer is what we will potentially be seeing on the following turn. Let's get to tapping.
It's just like we're back in 2014 again.
Do you miss those days? It's interesting. I retweeted a tweet earlier that was basically saying that this was the favorite meta game. I think it was Nostum, who I can't even remember who I retweeted. I just kind of mindlessly hit the button. But I think it was Nostum saying that he felt like this was the best meta game we've ever had. And I retweeted it in agreement. What I will say is the only one that really contests it for me is like Handlock, Patron Warrior, Control.
I don't know, you'd say Patron Warrior.
Yeah, Control Warrior, Patron Warrior, Handlock, Midrange Druid, Secret Paladin. Like that meta to me was like also one of the most dynamic that we've ever had. Like just 5 real powerhouse decks just smashing heads with each other and having different favorable matchups across the board. But yeah, this tap and try and find your giant dynamic is kind of a throwback to that period where we saw a lot of Handlock mirrors.
Honestly, this being the best competitive meta seems to be a very common opinion at the moment.
It does.
RDU was saying that in the interview last week, or earlier this week rather, and a lot of players have been saying that on Twitter over the last few days. An expansion coming out is always very exciting, but it's also going to be a little bit sad to see the end of this meta.
Yeah. There is the Doomsayer, as I predicted on turn 3. Now blocking this potential drop from Canada, consolidating Australia's first giant on the board, and then they have a second and a third giant if they want them with those faceless manipulators, and this has flipped the matchup right on its head.
Yep. Funnily enough, this Doomsayer also prevents Canada from playing their own Doomsayer to prevent Australia from playing their
Very
giant
true.
this turn. Preemptive Doomsayer attack. Oh, there it is. Just in the nick of time. If only there was no Doomsayer on the board stopping it from coming down.
The end is coming!
So instead, Monsanto, having to play something because his hand was at 10 cards there, just throws the Doomsayer away.
Yep.
And now this game is going to speed up significantly. As we see 8-8 after 8-8 after 8-8. It's not so bad for Canada, though, for the very reason that you described earlier. Hooked Reaver will come into effect soon. Oh my goodness.
That is more giants than you can shake a stick at. I'm just going to check real quickly, based on these faceless manipulator usages, how many of these decks are playing a Black Knight in there? They are not. Canada are not playing a Black Knight in their even lock.
Well, that makes this decision a little easier, doesn't it? I would imagine that faceless manipulator is actually an 8-8 with taunt.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, like the argument for using facelesses as giants here is that it's a little bit more mana efficient, and secondly, your mountain giants are always mountain giants. Your faceless manipulators are only mountain giants when there's a target for it. But when you're playing Q block, you do always have to like bear in mind or like weigh up how important a faceless manipulator is to you later, because facelessing a cube that has a Doom Guard inside it, like all this kind of madness becomes huge later on.
Did you see the look of shock on my face a few seconds ago, by the way, when the faceless manipulator went down?
Because the taunt took a few seconds to render. Yeah.
What? No, okay. But yeah, Siphon Soul, one of the few tools that the Even Warlock does have, and not even all Even Warlocks play Siphon Soul nowadays. But it's not going to deal with the next giant or the next one.
I believe that is a base level Spellstone in hand still as well.
It is, yeah.
So even with 2 procs of Defile, they're still in trouble.
Canada don't even have any means of upgrading that Spellstone just yet.
And they're also at 26 with a very threat-light hand from this point. Again, Greymane, their biggest remaining threat in hand.
I wonder.
Is there any merit to just dropping the Doomsayer and hoping that that tanks the 8 damage from Ginger Ninja's Giant?
I doubt it. I feel like that is the one remaining Doomsayer, right? Because they threw away the first one into the opponent's Doomsayer early on. So I feel like there's probably a need to try and find a tempo swing with that Doomsayer later. Like, if you do end up getting some kind of Defile Spellstone clear, then that Doomsayer can at least buy you some time, and then maybe that curves into your Gul'dan, and you're able to take control of the board that way, or at least, like, drop a 7/7 with tempo afterwards, you know? Again, this deck, even though it does play a ton of healing, and you are rewarded for dropping your health total low, so you don't have to panic just yet about a Mountain Giant running wild on the board and hitting you in the face. You just have to make sure the board doesn't get, you know, irreparably out of control.
Australia do have the ability to proc one of those Possessed Lackeys this turn if they want to.
They do. They also have the ability to cube a Giant, but no opportunity to proc it, which is unfortunate because I would hope that the Warlock is still playing Spellbreaker. Yes, it is. Obviously, you can see we ran into 1 or 2 little spectator issues there, which I hope will get resolved very quickly, but hopefully if we can reconnect, the wonderful patch that we got to the Hearthstone client will let us resume the game in process.
Yeah, we should be good. It's possible that the game is actually still going on right now. And where do you think they will take this turn, though? So you just mentioned that they could cube a Giant, but the problem is there's no way of proccing the cube immediately.
Yeah, you're testing my memory now, and you're getting me to resolve it every card that they had in hand at that point. Yeah, so they had Possessed Lackey, Coin Defile, right? Which the 2/1 is the initial proc, and then the 2/2 of their Possessed Lackey goes off. If they get a Void Lord from that position, they're in business. If they get a Doom Guard from there, not so much. It doesn't really do a lot on that board, 5/7 versus a 6/5.
Yeah.
So both plays have downsides because of that lack of Dark Pact in hand. But you know what I will say is basically any play they wanted to make there, they were in a commanding position just because of the density of Giants that they had in the early game.
Right. We talked a little bit about the matchup at the start, and you said that the reason, or one of the main reasons it's even Warlock favored is because they can get the Giants down first. Well, that just wasn't the case here.
Yeah, and Doomsayer can really change that. We've seen a lot of argument about that spot being Doomsayer or the poison 1/2 thing that I've just forgotten the name of, Stubborn Gastropod, right? And it's, you know, kind of similar in different ways in that kind of spot where if you play a 1/2 first, they have to spend a turn dealing with your 1/2. If you play a Doomsayer, they have to just pass the turn. So, you know, the difference is that the Stubborn Gastropod can take a Spellstone or a Hellfire away from your opponent as well to then let them develop the Giant after, which is important because sometimes it reduces their hand size by 1, sometimes it's a removal tool they don't have later in the game. But you can see functionally Doomsayer is still the same thing. Like that's your goal with either of those cards in the mirror, is just to flip the Giant tempo back on its head.
So while we wait for the game to appear again, as it's going to be a little bit of time, why don't we go through the rest of these lineup of matchups and talk through which team we think is going to be favored. So after the first game, we have Aggro Mage on Australia's side versus Odd Paladin on Canada's side. Now,
Well, it's easy.
I know Aggro Mage is one of your favorite decks in the entire of Hearthstone right now, but Odd Paladin?
Yeah, just about. Just about by about 75% or so.
Why is this so favoured, Sartor?
Because even if you play your Mana Worm on turn 1, which is usually your key to victory with Aggro Mage, you know, they play their own 1-drops and then they press hero power on turn 2, and then you're just unable to contest their board from that point. You know, the game that we saw Aggro Mage win, which I believe was USA against the UK,
right, yeah.
It was Mana Worm on 1, and then it was Arcane Missiles, Cinderstorm. Like every ping effect in the deck, just back to back to back.
It was Arcane Missiles and Sorcerer's Apprentice on the same turn or something.
And from that, like that's what it takes. That's the 25% in that matchup when you get every single missile draw in your top 6 to 8 cards.
Okay, so you're saying probably a point to Canada there. Then we've got Australia on the Shuttlewalk and Canada on Murloc Mage. Murloc Mage.
One more time?
Murloc Mage.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's actually not bad. It's one of the better Murloc impressions I've heard in my time.
Thank you. I learned from our friend here.
Yeah, Murloc Mage is a deck that I don't have a ton of experience with. What little I have played of it, I think it's vaguely...
I was gesturing to nothing.
I think it's vaguely preferable in the metagame to me than aggro mages, just because, you know, at least you can fight for board a little bit against some of the other aggro decks. You're still not favored in them. But also in a world full of healing rains and dry whisker armorers and ferocious howls and branching paths, the plan of draw all my burn and throw it at your face just kind of hits a brick wall. An aggro deck needs to build a board against the control decks right now to win the game, and Murloc Mage is just a little bit better at doing that than aggro Mage for me. But against Shudderwock Shaman, they are still very able to do that and run away with the game. I'd give the edge to them, but as I said to you when we were going into this, the throwaway comment of Lightning Storm is a hell of a card, because it really is in that matchup. There's a few ways to buff health on your minions, but not a great deal. So a lot of the time, you can't even force Volcano. Lightning Storm is enough to do the job.
Right. So that's potentially a close one, but in theory, another point to Canada on the Murloc Mage. We'll continue talking through these matchups and hopefully bring you some more Hearthstone very soon. We're just going to go to a short break to sort things out, so see you shortly. Welcome back to the Hearthstone Global Games, where Sottle has some news for you.
Yes. Unfortunately, the servers are not cooperating with us particularly well. We are back in the game. Don't go anywhere. We are about to bring you some Hearthstone, but unfortunately, it did disconnect us from that game entirely, so we do have to regame. Of course, my heart goes out to Australia, who had reversed that matchup, had a perfect draw, and now have to regame again, but there's not a lot we can do about it, unfortunately. It's just the situation we have.
It's all right. They can just do exactly the same thing again. Drop Doomsayer for turn 3, and then their own giant the turn after that.
Yep.
No worries whatsoever. Now, in all seriousness, this is a favoured matchup for the even lock. Canada get another go at it through no fault of anyone, you know, competing in the game. It's happening, and Australia are going to have to make the best of it.
They are. Not much more to add to that, as I believe we're getting fairly close to get into this game. I think we've run our Warlock versus Warlock intros into the ground already with the few delays that we've had. So hopefully, through the magical power of broadcasting, we can bring you a game. And there it is. And there it is, not only in-game, but there it is in terms of the giant. The missing giant for Canada.
There's a second one as well.
Deep breath.
Oh, okay. Giants on both sides. That's something. At least it's a little bit more even.
Top joke, Falcone. Well done.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Now you see a big difference in the matchup straight away. Monsanto gets to tap on turn 1. Canada pick up an extra card. Australia just have to pass. And now if Australia cannot find that same Doomsayer that they had previously, then they are going to be in a much more difficult position this time around.
Yeah, no appearances from the Doomsayer so far, and obviously the Cube Warlock doesn't get as many opportunities to tap for cards as the Even Warlock does freely every single turn. Things are about to get very difficult for Australia. Last time they had double Mountain Giant, double Faceless Manipulator to copy the Giants, even had Possessed Lackey Prockable in hand. Ginger Ninja going to have to work a little bit harder this game.
I wonder.
Just taking a look at Australia's list here. Yeah, there is no Poison Dude, I've forgotten the name of again, Stubborn Gastropod in hand for Australia, which is the only real in the deck for Australia, which is the only real consideration to be throwing away such a valuable resource as Acidic Swampoots here, which is the only realistic remaining play from Canada on this turn. So I guess they are just using their time to talk through the sequencing as best they can, and potentially just bluffing, representing some other options. Just going to throw away to fine. Just want to make sure they can continue tapping as much as possible this game.
And as we can see, that Ooze is going to come in very handy for Monsanto quite soon. Extra Void Lord, that's all right.
Yeah, it's another of the problems that you do run into in this matchup, though, because when Q-Block was at its most powerful, there actually weren't that many silence effects in the game, and then Even Lock is a deck that came along that just kind of plays Spellbreaker through necessity, really. Just needs to fill up enough slots in the deck, and Spellbreaker goes in there. So not even Void Lords can protect you from the big threats of huge amounts of damage sat on the board in the later game.
Weapon removal is also rampant, at least this week, in the Hearthstone Global Games, as a a lot of the teams have been trying to counter Malygos Druid rather than banning it, and they've been jamming weapon removal into all of their decks.
Yeah.
Definitely an argument to be made there for Cube Warlock not being the strongest pick this week as a result of that strategy.
Right. So now, because of this thrown away Defile on the previous turn, Canada are able to tap Giant here, which I guess is their thinking in throwing it away, is that they do want to be life tapping every turn. Not only does it keep resources high, but it turns that Hook Reaver into a threat much, much quicker. And so tap Giant it is.
Yep, and then they can just choose whichever large minion that they'd like to play every turn. Giant, Twilight Drake, and probably into Hooked Reaver by that point.
Right. Australia do contest though, and the Stonehill Defender is pretty key from the previous turn, just to limit the options that Canada have available. This is why, you know, first Giant is so important, because at that point on a raw Giant versus Giant board, you basically have full initiative, right? You get to decide whether trading is better than for you, whether going face is better for you. You get to play around with, you know, small minions and some Fury Protectors to try and stop your opponent having the same options. But the Stonehill Defender does limit that just a little bit.
Well, it prevents this Mountain Giant from connecting to the face, but the issue for Ginger Ninja is that he's not going to want to be going face with his Giant because of that Hooked Reaver again. Canada can just curve now Mountain Giant into potentially Hooked Reaver next turn if that face hit does happen. So Australia going to actually have to work on controlling this board best they can. Yeah, there's no way that Giant's going face.
Nope. And now Australia have a big decision to make. I'll take another look at the deck list here. There is 2 copies of Acidic Swampooze in Canada's even lock, which makes this Skull of Minari a devastating proposition here. Like, if you spend your entire turn on a Skull when there's 16 damage on the board facing you down, you're going to be in trouble. I imagine the Giant will trade for the reasons you described, so it does take it down to 1 Mountain Giant, but it's still such an enormous tempo swing, particularly because you're going back into a 6-mana turn from your opponent, so it's so natural for them to be able to play Acidic Swampooze as well. Just Ooze and any 4-drop is just such a clean play for Canada.
Instead, Australia can do as they did last game and start copying Mountain Giants with the Faceless Manipulator in hand. I mean, it looks like that's the only real option, because as you said, with double Acidic Swampooze, playing the Skull is just, it's a game-losing play if it goes wrong.
Yep.
And at least this way, Australia could next turn go Possess Lackey and coin out Dark Pact or something to at least guarantee another minion on the board.
Right.
As Canada picks up their Siphon Soul again. Able to clean up that Mountain Giant easily and just smack the face for 8, or go ahead and drop a Twilight Drake.
I wonder.
Honestly, just a wealth of powerful minions in the hand.
Yeah, Australia have just done enough here just to slow this game down to the point where their late game options do have a chance now to take over. But with 1 Doomguard drawn and then not coming from that Possessed Lackey, their ability to counter push is limited. Of course, the fact that the Skull of Minari is basically a no-go from this point is also limiting their options. And as we mentioned, Void Lords just really aren't the massive oppressive walls that they are in other matchups when you're facing down a Spellbreaker deck. A Spellbreaker deck and a Hellfire deck at that. Like, they're both very clean ways of dealing with Void Lords.
Monsanto's deck just seems to have all of the possible tools that they could ever need to deal with Ginger Ninja's threat.
Oh my, that second Librarian is absurd off the top.
Both Spellstones now at 7. There we go. Now that's going to slow Canada down a little bit.
Justice, Falcone? Is there such a thing?
Do you have a particular player you'd prefer to win this game by any chance, Subtle?
Yeah.
I mean, there's still 2 Twilight Drakes in the hand.
There is.
Ginger Ninja not out of the woods just yet. But slowing Monsanto down is possibly all Ginger Ninja actually has to do.
Yes. Now the initial onslaught is over and they dealt with the Giants very, very efficiently. I imagine this is homunculus. Just get yourself towards that hooked Reaver. Start upgrading the Spellstone as well. No, favouring the Sunfury Protector instead.
Now again, we established earlier there are no Black Knights in the decks.
Yep.
So, what's the advantage here of taunting the Twilight Drake? It's almost as if Monsanto doesn't want to take damage this turn.
Well, it's not necessarily about which minion can attack face. It's about the minion that has taunt, right? Because if you play the homunculus, it's a 2/4 and it has taunt, so therefore the 2/1s contest it automatically on board. Whereas the way Canada have chosen to do this, the 2/1s don't really challenge anything. They can't challenge the Sunfury Protector because it's hidden behind the taunt in this way. So I guess this is a slightly more awkward board position. I'm just not sure for me whether that's worth it over the reduced health, the buff Spellstone. But I guess on turn 8 they have the ability to drop it down anyway. But I guess they'll be looking more towards 2/4 drops at that point anyway. So maybe it's their turn 9 play and then Hooked Reaver comes down on 10. I guess they might have been looking at Homunculus again this turn as well as an option.
Just going back though, the turn that you said the second Librarian was such a huge draw. I mean, we've now seen both of the Spellstones doing a pretty phenomenal job, clearing up a Mountain Giant and also a Twilight Drake, doing most of the work there. Keeping Ginger Ninja nice and healthy. Obviously, the Cube Warlock doesn't want to take damage, unlike its even counterpart.
Yeah, especially since a lot of its rebound has been nerfed with Dark Pact now restoring less health. But yeah, that first Librarian into the second one was just so insane. Because of course they're Cube Lock, they're not running Homunculus, for example. So it's not like there were other outs that they could have picked up. You know, in an even lock, they wouldn't have been a Librarian to start with. But let's say Homunculus was in the deck, they could have then coined out a Homunculus and still made the same play.
Right.
But with the deck that they have, that Librarian into Librarian was their only out in that situation to kill the Giant.
Okay. Well, suddenly Cube Dark Pact is a possibility if Australia wanted to summon a second Mountain Giant.
Yep.
Make the value trade first. Is it worth it this turn? Coining out the Void Lord instead. I mean, I guess this is a pretty safe turn to drop the Void Lord, because if it does get silenced or dealt with the trades and the Hellfire, Ginger Ninja doesn't really care. It's not like he just dies on board, and he's got the Gul'dan to play in a couple turns.
Yeah, I think this is a hand now where Ginger Ninja does feel like he can play defensively because, as you said, if this gets Spellbreakered and ignored this turn, like say Spellbreaker comes out from the opponent, what's the rest of the turn? It's going to be trading the Giant, right, most of the time. So then your 3/9 just remains on board, and then you can go back into Cube Dark Pact even on your Void Lord, and then suddenly you already have more Void Lords in play than they can possibly deal with silencers, and then they all come back from cooldown later.
Yeah.
So I think coining out the Void Lord here could potentially just be the lockdown that Australia need. Can't see too many ways from here that Canada can develop through all of this wall that Australia are going to put in front of them.
It's amazing that Australia have been able to pull this off not once but twice, getting the upper hand in this game. The Spellstone in Monsanto's hand has been upgraded once, so it would have to be paired with a Defile, I guess, or a Hellfire to deal with that Mountain Giant. It's a lot of resources to put in there. Gonna have to go with it. Leave the 3 Voidwalkers on the board. Oh, okay. Going to develop the Hooked Reaver instead. It's doing the same job as the Spellstone, I guess. The Mountain Giant still just straight up trades into it.
Yeah, it's a scary proposition, but I don't think they're dead to anything, right? Because the damage is on the Giant, Hellfire doesn't allow them to push, they're not dead to Doomguard from hand. Those are your first 2 big checking points when you're making a risky play like this. And they don't they just didn't want to be using the Spellstone on the previous turn because it would strand 2 Hooked Reavers in their hands to do so.
Yeah. The Carnivorous Cube keeps catching my eye there in the hand.
Yeah.
Like when you see a Mountain Giant with 3 health remaining,
Yeah.
and you see Cube Dark Pact as an option, it's just a shame that the Giant can't attack first. So yeah, gonna have to just trade it. Forget about the Cube for now. Ooh, okay. Gonna try and use the Doomsayer as a tempo swing again.
This is
Vitally
really nice, by
putting the
way.
skull down
Yeah.
afterwards because the order does matter there.
But it's also, like, I don't think they have any illusions that this skull is going to go off, but, you know, what did I say right back at the beginning? They can't spend 5 mana on Skull of the Minari and then have it dealt with for 2 mana. It's just too much of a tempo shift. Well, now that tempo shift doesn't exist because it would be being played into a Doomsayer, so they get their risk-free skull this turn.
Yeah, I mean, what's the alternative, right? Like, Monsanto either doesn't develop anything this turn, or he has to play Hellfire Spellstone and deal with the Doomsayer, or just the Spellstone, I guess. I think that's been upgraded twice
Yeah, they
now.
double buffed it, yeah.
And that's still not a big tempo swing, as Canada will be spending 6 mana to deal with the Skull and the Doomsayer.
Yeah, they do have the best possible turn, though, which is Hooked Reaver, Greater Spellstone, and the Acidic Ooze here, which I think is as powerful a turn as they could possibly have with the cards remaining in their deck. But I still like the attempt from Australia. It was very, very nicely timed. Of course, didn't even mention the fact that if the Doomsayer goes off, they just have their Blood Reaver go down on an empty board afterwards.
Second, Doom Guard, not exactly what Ginger Ninja's looking for once Skull of Minari has been dealt with. There's not a good Godfrey turn here, is there?
I wonder.
Go 1, 2, 3, 4 by killing off the, well, just by playing it now, but there's no way of getting rid of the Hooked Reaver. I mean, Gul'dan's a pretty good card. Summon what? 1 Void Lord, 3 Void Walkers if he trades in this one first?
Yeah. But you never saw that Spellbreaker come out, and that is a lot of damage to leave up on the board.
It is, but it would have to be a Spellbreaker paired with Hellfire or something, right? Because of the several Void Walkers that come back as well.
Right.
I'm gonna just summon 1 Void Lord this way instead. There's still another Void Lord in the deck in addition to this, as well as the other one came from the Stonehill Defender.
Oh, you're right, yeah, it did. I forgot about them. Just try again with the Doomsayer.
I love how they're using these Doomsayers.
Yeah. They just really want that empty board Gul'dan.
So many possibilities.
It's also worth noting that, you know, one of the advantages Q-Block does have in this matchup is that their Doomsayers are useful in the mid-game and late game. When you're playing against Q-Block, if you're not Doomsayering to deny their Giants early, they are actually completely useless cards. Worse than useless, actually. They're actively detrimental cards because, you know, you can play them onto a board, your opponent just slams Possessed Lackey into it, they slam Cube into it, they slam anything they want into it, and you're just doing their work for them. So Doomsayers just become inherently frustrating cards to use against Q-Block past that turn 4 point, whereas you can see twice Australia have found really good turns to try and get something out of their Doomsayer. Hellfire trade.
Wow. Monsanto really not wanting any of these Doomsayers to go off, but hey, look at how good Canada's board is looking now.
Godfrey cleans this up nicely.
Is Godfrey worth it this turn, though?
Yeah, that's a good question. Does it need to be done? Can they just go back to the Void Lord well? Can they just go back to the Gul'dan well? Whichever way around they want to do it.
There's only 15 damage on board, so worst case, again, that Spellbreaker you keep mentioning.
Yeah.
Void Lord is still fine.
Well, if they're tapping, they're Godfreying. And there's no options remaining that are powerful once that 2 mana's committed.
Okay, so after Blood Reaver Gul'dan gets played for Australia, they get a board full of either 1 or 2 Void Lords and everything else Void Walkers.
Yes.
Can Canada deal with that? Like, is Gul'dan game-ending for Australia?
Not always, but it's the situation in which you Gul'dan as the Q block. If you're doing it in this kind of position, or in the position that Ginger Ninja spent most of the game trying to set up, where he got that free turn with the Doomsayer, then it's problematic. If you've got some minions on board and you can make a couple of trades, then just maybe just one Hellfire will get the job done for you, just taking care of the Voidwalkers. But without that, yeah, the 3/9 initial bodies are an enormous problem.
Doomsayer's coming down on the other side. Same purpose, though. This does prevent Gul'dan from being played. If it...
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Both of them.
Okay.
Shields up.
Okay, this might be a stupid question, Sartor, but is there any merit in still playing Blood Reaver Gul'dan? Just to... Ginger Ninja will end the board with several Voidwalkers and also will have the upgraded hero power.
I would argue there's more merit in cubing this 4/4.
Yep.
It's exactly what I said. Like, these Doomsayers are just such a nuisance for you, and now you can just threaten lethal on the following turn, even if Gul'dan comes down. It's a lethal that is rare and probably not even worth going for, but the 8 points of damage that you threaten on board are still a massive deal. Trying to remember how many demons have died from Monsanto now, because that Blood Reaver Gul'dan isn't looking too bad. There's been at least one Homunculus. Yeah, one Homunculus, both Hooked Reavers.
Yeah.
Not sure if the second Homunculus is there or not.
One Taunt is looking pretty good to me. Gets the 5 armor this turn as well. This does contest Australia's board for now. Ginger Ninja can push 9 damage to the face guaranteed. Could push 14 if the first Doom Guard didn't discard the other, but that's no good because Monsanto still has 16 health.
Yep. Defile's a little awkward as well. It's not a bad situation to be dropping your Gul'dan into, though. You can take a, if you can Gul'dan and trade here and just leave not enough damage on the board to be able to threaten your Void Lords coming back the other way. It's very reasonable. And now you're just threatening lethal all over again, as long as you get some nice juicy 3/9s back here. Just the one.
One nice juicy 3/9. Okay, well, there's a reasonable Defile setup, right? Trade the Hooked Reaver into Void Lord, hero power the Void Lord. That's 7 damage, so the Hooked Reaver has 1 health. Void Lord has 2, Void Walkers have 3.
The Void Lord dies on the second iteration?
That's right.
So then the third one kills the Voidwalkers and deals 1 damage to the remaining Voidwalkers.
So they all end up having 1 health, and then Dread Infernal can finish the job.
Looks very nice. Sign me up.
Oh, where's that arrow going?
That leaves them missing a 1, right? If they make the Voidwalker trade, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Your play seems clean to me. You've reached the point where you're not going to get to watch it resolve. You've just got to trust that you've got it right. Pretty sure they have that.
Oh, he's gone for Gen instead at the end there, rather than the Dread.
Okay.
That is only 2 Voidwalkers, I guess.
Yeah, seems fine.
Oh, is there a better situation to drop Dread Infernal, though? That would be my main question here. When is dealing 1 damage to all minions going to make more of an impact than right now?
That's a good question. And this 6/5 is immediately contested on the board as well by the 2 Voidwalkers and the ping.
Whereas the 6/6 would not have been.
So many bloody decisions.
Yeah, you tell him, Gul'dan.
Maximum damage with the Doom Guards is 12 this turn, so even further off than before.
Darkness, rise.
And just when you thought you'd seen all of the Void Lords you were going to see this game,
Yeah.
there's the third, fourth.
Fifth? No, they didn't all. They didn't all res. Yeah, it was fourth. Yeah.
However, because Australia went with Void Lord, again hasn't been dealt with, so yeah, Canada can just do this. They can just trade and ping away the Void Lord, leaving just a bunch of Void Walkers on the board, and then they can drop the Lich King, which seems pretty good to me.
They can indeed do all of that, yes.
Lich King isn't even contested on the board with the hero power.
5 plus 3 is 8 where I come from.
Oh, sorry. For some reason, I didn't think there were that many Void Walkers on the board.
Has it been that long since you've seen a Void Lord?
It has. You don't see it very often nowadays.
My hunger grows.
Yeah, I think I like the Dread Inferno instead. It does beg the question, though, how much better was killing those two 1/1s this turn than it was last turn? With the 6/1 not being killed, oh sorry, with the Gen not being killed on the previous turn, I mean, maybe you can make the argument, but yeah.
But sure, I mean, like if those Void Walkers were dealt with the previous turn, assuming Ginger Ninja does the same thing, then yeah, the Lich King would not have been contested.
Right.
Because there would have been less Void Walkers.
So many bloody decisions.
And so we walk hand in hand towards fatigue. And this is where that extra card that you draw on turn 1 as even lock comes back to bite you. If you look at the fatigue counts. Just has to be a Hellfire turn, right? I guess you can do it with Defile instead. Does that buy you mana though? Like useful mana that you actually spend on things?
I would say that Defile is on average less useful than Hellfire.
That's fair.
Therefore, using one up is better than using the Hellfire. It gets discarded anyway, along with the other Defile. And Australia just going to play the aggressive game now.
The answer to my question is also kind of yes. They got to squeeze a ping in there as well, which is very valuable.
But that Spellstone there gets upgraded by this Homunculus, and then 5 plus 3 is greater than 7, so...
Hey, you got that one, right?
I did.
And it's just too important because you know there's a cube left. You know that Australia are near the end of their deck. The chances that they have that cube are very high, and you do not want Doom Guards getting cubed anytime soon. Although, I believe one of those remaining 2 cards is still the Spellbreaker, right?
Yep.
Pretty confident.
We've not seen it this game.
Yeah.
We've been talking about it all game, and it's just not reared its head. There's the second Hellfire. All it's doing, though, is clearing up Canada's board. Maybe that's enough. Lich King's going to cause some problems down the road, though, and Australia know that it's still there somewhere.
I don't think you Hellfire this. I was just about to say, call me crazy, but I wonder if you just cube the Ooze this turn.
You're crazy.
Well, apparently so are Australia then. Here's my argument. Now, that's not the Spellbreaker, but you know that they are, at worst, for you 50-50 to draw a Spellbreaker that turn if it wasn't already in their hand, right? It's overwhelmingly likely that they Spellbreaker this turn. It's overwhelmingly likely that they Spellbreaker whatever you Carnivorous cube. But this is literally the last chance that you ever get to cube a minion.
Yep.
Because if you Doom Guard, even if you don't discard your cube, you push 5, you cube it, they Spellbreaker it on the following turn. And not only is it better for you to have this chance that your cube can actually pay out, it's much better for you to get the Spellbreaker onto the board first and then cast your Hellfire afterwards in response to the Spellbreaker, because it's actually a clean way to deal with that minion.
There's also a big reward for Ginger Ninja if this cube doesn't get hit by the Spellbreaker, as I believe one of their remaining 3 cards is the second Faceless Manipulator.
That does sound right.
So if if Ginger Ninja's next draw is Faceless Manipulator, and he can copy that cube, then at least he's managed to squeeze some value out of it.
Yeah.
However, copying the Lich King probably also quite tempting.
So Canada, with this play, it kind of signals that they've given up on ever just landing Lich King on the board uncontested, which would have been a big goal of theirs. You know, try and trade card for card until Lich King was the last thing that they've played. So to make this play, they must have calculated that that's not going to happen. And that's just another big upside of the cube play, honestly, because it's just those extra stats that you guarantee on board over a couple of turns that can then continue to contest Lich Kings in the future.
So many bloody decisions.
The problem is for Australia this turn, clearing that Lich King means using up Hellfire and having to do this first. So that cube may as well have been silenced because the Feral didn't do anything.
Right. Now, again, this is going to sound like a very stupid statement until I justify it. Is Void Lord better than Rin then?
I was thinking, like, obviously no decks are being blown up.
Yeah.
However,
but it's more total stats than that Void Lord will be over the remaining course of the game. And you are Gul'dan versus Gul'dan, so you will survive 5 to 6 more turns from this position.
Counterpoint though,
Yeah.
Spellbreaker that we've been talking about all game.
Right.
It's worse. Rin is worse when silenced than Void Lord is when silenced. One has 3 more stats than the other.
It's a fair point. So can you then get in a position where they're forced to play the Spellbreaker as a minion before you play the Rin? I guess the then counter to that is that if you have to wait those 3 or 4 extra turns for that to happen, then you don't have enough time to get the value out of the Rin minions. Okay. Australia thought about all of that very, very quickly and immediately took Void Lord off that Stonehill defender. I'm impressed.
I must
Me too.
feed now.
I think they just, honestly, I think they just...
Whoa!
Which minion had the most...
Whoa!
Just never mind, I'm out. This whole game! What's the Spellbreaker gonna do? What's the Spellbreaker gonna do?
Almost out of
Silence the Stonehill
cards.
defender.
Yeah.
Oh, and also Dark Pact. So Rin Dark Pact was a possibility. However, Australia do want stats on the board, and I guess Dark Pacting the Rin is a very slow way of putting stats on the board.
Yeah.
Hey, now Void Lord's looking great though.
Many bloody decisions.
It does get challenged on board. But they know they're out of ways, theoretically, to deal with the 1/3s. They might have a decent idea that the remaining card is Doom Pact, just on the usage of cards so far.
It could be several though, right? Like it could be Army of the Dead, for example. Just there are other useless Death Knight cards that would not have been played yet until this point.
Are there others, though? You've named one more.
Army of the Dead. Is there any?
I think all of the others will have got used.
Would Death and Decay have been used before now?
Maybe not. I think Death Coil would have. I think Anti-Magic Shell would have.
What would Death Coil have hit though? Because it's even worth considering saving that for lethal, or at least dealing with a big threat like this Doom Guard, and there goes Void Lord.
I wish I could tell you exactly what that last card is. It's a Faceless Manipulator, right? That's.
I'm pretty sure it's Faceless Manipulator, yeah.
So if it's a Faceless Manipulator,
It copies the Dread Infernal.
then this is fine. Australia have won, and this play is correct.
Okay, so Canada trades into the Doom Guard, plays the Dread Infernal, pings away the Stonehill Defender.
And then Australia achieve board equilibrium for the rest of the game, and they always win from board equilibrium.
Australia plays the Faceless. Interesting.
Okay.
However, Ginger Ninja's still ahead
of
on
cards.
fatigue
Yes.
and also on damage, so Monsanto can just never play that minion. Yeah, but now, whenever Canada does play the Dread Infernal, they will get one hit with it. They just need to time it correctly, right?
But they also have to time it correctly because on that turn where they play the Dread Infernal, Australia can just Faceless it and Dark Pact the minion afterwards.
To heal, right.
If Canada's plan is to wait until the point where that one swing from Dread Inferno is lethal, that's likely to be around the time where they're dying anyway.
Bloody decisions.
And that one turn from the Faceless Dark Pact will swing it in their favor, in Australia's favor, sorry. Australia also have to weigh up the merits of just playing a 3-3 here at some point. I'm pretty sure that's always wrong.
They just lose the game if they do that, I think,
yeah.
regardless of what it is. And you have to assume that both of these players know exactly what is in their opponent's hand as well.
Oh, yeah.
Someone on the team will have been tracking it.
Yes. As soon as the game gets anywhere near fatigue, I think one of the first things that was figured out last year is just to assign someone to say, all right, you over there in the corner, don't do anything except track cards from this point and make sure we know what's going on when it gets to fatigue. That's it. If they play it now, it's too early. It just gets faceless, and then they have to trade, or they're just facing down lethal much quicker than they'd like to. If they wait it out, Australia have the Dark Pact that they can just leverage afterwards.
So many.
And those two cards ahead in fatigue are just making all the difference.
Yeah, I don't think that it's possible to get the timing good enough where Dark Pact wouldn't heal Ginger Ninja enough to prevent the lethal from Monsanto.
If there's one person that I can see theoretically finding a way out of this position, though, it is Purple. I think Purple is one of the best mathematicians in Hearthstone. Doesn't mean he can achieve the impossible.
Okay, that was the time, says Purple.
Takes him down to 15, 3 takes him down to 12, so then on the following turn it's ping, and yes, so no, because with the ping they still go out of range this turn, right? So they don't need to Dark Pact this to stay alive.
Which then means, as you said before,
that Canada must trade or they are facing down lethal.
But that just means they lose this game regardless, doesn't it? Yep.
Okay.
Right, well, amazingly, Australia have managed to do it twice.
Yeah.
Not quite twice, but it did look like the first time they were going to win this game. Then we had the replay, and they managed to find a way again. I think a lot of that came down to the Doomsayer plays, both games actually. They timed their Doomsayers very well, forced these tempo swings, or rather presented tempo swings on the other side, like when they played the Doomsayer with the Skull of Minari. Knowing that the skull was probably going to get destroyed, but then it's like, if it doesn't get destroyed, great, I get my Doom God out. If it does get destroyed, it's okay. You don't take too much tempo away from me.
Yeah, and I think then if you fast forward a little bit, the next most crucial play there was that penultimate Doom Guard that they play. Oh, sorry, the second Doom Guard that they play, but on like the penultimate period of the game.
Right.
Like once the Doom Guard was played, there was only one more thing to happen after that point, which was the Dread Infernal interaction with each other. As soon as that Doom Guard was played, I froze up and like needed to know what that last card in the deck was. As soon as I realized it was Faceless Manipulator, which of course Australia had a much clearer idea about, you heard me say it. Okay, the game's over, they've won. Because they recognized that situation much quicker than I did, but then you just saw it play out. It was checkmate from that position.
Yep. And Australia looking good. Let's take a look at what's coming next this series, though. It is going to be that matchup that you said was not looking good for Australia one bit. It's going to be Canada on the Odd Paladin versus Australia on the Aggro Mage.
Yes, indeed. And this is the aggro burny spell aggro mage, not the fishy, murlocky, build a board and hit you aggro
No,
mage.
that's next game.
Yes. That is Canada who are bringing the Murloc mage, and it is Australia who bring what is still erroneously referred to as Tempo Mage in most places, but it's an aggro deck.
Yeah, we here in the Hearthstone Global Game Studio do not refer to that deck as Tempo Mage. Why is that, Sota? Why isn't this a Tempo deck?
because I complained about it a lot, and the rest of the UK guys kind of went along with me, so I wouldn't shout at them.
I'll rephrase the question. What is it specifically about the deck that you complain about?
Because, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, a tempo deck is a deck that plays cards that can be more efficient for mana usage in terms of like swinging the board state than their mana cost suggests, right? So SI7 Agent creates board swings. That's why we've had Tempo Rogue. That's why Miracle Rogue is one of the best tempo decks in the game. Sorcerer's Apprentice, Unstable Portal with, you know, Mana Worms, which are way too efficient a minion, and then Flame Waker blowing everything up. That's a tempo deck.
Is that pretty good tempo?
That's swinging the board state. It's using leverage. Playing a few minions in the early game, hitting your opponent in the face with them, losing the board by turn 5 every game, and then throwing fireballs and frostbolts at your opponent's face. That's an aggro deck.
Yep. That's a face deck.
Is that good enough for you?
That's almost like the old shaman deck, isn't it? With like tunnel trogs and lava.
It's exactly like face shaman, yeah. And what did we call that? We called it face shaman.
I called it tempo shaman. Yeah, face shaman.
My 5-mana 2/8 weapon is just such sick tempo. I just equip it and hit some minions until they're all dead.
So what are the specifics of this aggro mage deck? Is it pretty standard? We've got yeah, not even
Pretty
a
much.
copy of Keysmith in there. It's just double life drinker, pyroblast, smack him in the face as much as possible deck. It's got a Mani Berserker. That's kind of tempo-y.
It is, and it's helpful at least against Paladin. For example, I was gonna rein myself in. I was about to say you'd rather have a Mani Berserker than Keysmith. I'm not quite sure how true that is because counterspell's really nutty against Paladin. They have Blessing of Might. And then they have level up. Like that's pretty much, so you have a good chance of blocking level up with Counterspell. So having those 38% chances for a 3rd and 4th copy of Counterspell during the game is quite a big deal. But a Mani Berserker is actually a card that can do work in the early game against Paladin, which is what you're lacking really outside of, you know, your Mana Worm on turn 1.
I mean, it's also a double threat, right? Because you always have the option of pinging it to deal the 5 to the face because of the Enrage. But as you said, specifically in matchups like the odd Paladin, where they're trying to take over the board, it can be very useful in that respect as well. I just want to glance at the odd Paladin list we're about to see, try and work out if there are any particular cards that are important against aggro mage. There's nothing particularly huge I can think of. I guess I'm thinking back to the UK versus USA game and how the aggro mage was able to take the victory there. And I guess cards like Dire Mole can be pretty strong against Cinderstorms and Arcane Missiles.
Yeah, I think with odd Paladin, there's like more cards that you can play that's a downside as opposed to looking for cards that are positive. Like if you're playing like a double Divine Favor deck, for example, then you know you can get some dead draws against aggro mage, but this is not that. It's a single copy of Divine Favor. There's also only one Vine Cleaver, so their chances of having any kind of dead draw are incredibly low, and that's what the Paladin really does need to have. If it's not going to be that all the missiles draw for the aggro mage, then it's going to be a 5-mana, 5-mana, 7-mana, 7-mana draw for the Paladin where they just don't do anything for quite a long time. But even then, pressing the button is still so annoying.
I say this to Lorinda every time we cast in our Paladin game because he looks at the opening hand and says, oh, it's not a great opening hand for the Paladin. And I say every time, yeah, it is. They've got hero power that they can press every single turn. There is no bad opening hand for the Paladin. Obviously, in certain matchups there are, like in the odd Paladin mirror, etc. But
it's like a quest. It's just always in your opening hand.
Yeah.
2-mana quest. Press the button. Reward, win the game.
That's a strong quest. It's a powerful reward.
It's not quite as good as original Quest Rogue, though.
Nope.
Good talk.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. Except the Quest Rogue costs 1 mana, so it's slightly better.
Yeah.
Well, that is not a dead draw for the Jaw Dude.
Nope.
In the old red, white, and black, by the way.
Complexity, the Jaw Dude.
Yes, indeed.
Lots of token generation. Again, Lost in the Jungle and Righteous Protector, in addition to the hero power and Corridor Creeper. If things did go horribly wrong, just to put a 0-mana 2/5 on the board, yeah, it's looking good. Not terrible for Citizen Nappa either. However, no Mana Worm.
Yeah, and I assure you that some joke was just made about Citizen Nappa being a bad player who can't draw Mana Worm because no Mana Worm was drawn. Citizen Nappa started laughing. This is just the kind of thing that Hearthstone players do to amuse themselves because we're a sad bunch, really, when you break it down.
Reporting for duty.
Rips the jungle on turn 1.
Oh, there it is. I think you could tell by Citizen Nappa's reaction before you could tell by the card draw there that was what I wanted to see. However, it's not an easy turn, is it?
I wonder.
Why do you say that?
You think you just throw down the Arcanologist?
Yeah, I don't really see a great deal of upside to Armani Berserker just yet. So Arcanologist gives you the most options coming forward. You pick up your counterspell. You're probably not going to play it next turn. Mana Worm Armani Berserker seems more likely, but if you do draw Kirin Tormage off the top, you just give yourself more options. And this first threat that you play is never going to earn the right to just hit face and win the game, right? Like it's not like the upside of Armani Berserker means anything. This first 2-3 that you play is going to spend its time trading into 1/1s.
Right.
That's just what's going to happen. So you might as well use your Arcanologist first and then try and get into a world where Armani Berserker can pressure later.
But you can see why the Paladin is a clear favorite here, as we already have 4 1/1s. Arcane Missiles is the answer. Usually clearing up 3 of these. So originally, I guess the play will have been Mana Worm Ping until the Arcane Missiles was drawn. How does that change things? Does it now just become Berserker and Missiles, or do you think Citizen Nappa's going to want to still use a Ping to clear up any of these 1/1s that survive?
Well, you can wait and see your options, right? If you're going to play Missiles, you can just play Missiles first, and then if you need to ping, you can, if you even want to, because I think contesting one remaining 1/1 with a Armani Berserker is arguably better than pinging it off anyway.
Also, Australia could just play the 2 minions. They end up with 9 health on the board.
That was, when you said I think the play initially was Mana Worm Ping, I think the play initially was Mana Worm Armani Berserker. I think Mana Worm Ping is inferior to that. Yeah, and like I said, one remaining 1/1, it feels better to play a 2-3 than to ping it off, and this is kind of the exact argument why Mana Worm Armani Berserker was better in the first place, right? Ping a 1/1 or play a 2-3.
I wonder.
The draw has just got a little bit awkward.
It
Canada.
has. Jordan feels like he's sort of fighting from behind now, which isn't the position that they ever want to be in against this mage.
No.
It's the power of Arcane Missiles in this matchup, though, and a great illustration of why when the USA were able to get Arcane Missiles followed by Cinderstorm, they did some serious work.
Yeah. But straight away, you can see there's very little reason to panic in this matchup. They just pressed the button, they played a 1-drop, and again, there's just theoretically more things in play than Australia are capable of dealing with this turn. And Australia have had 3 great turns up until this point, and it's still effortless for Paladin to make a board they can't deal with.
Well, if Australia did have Cinderstorm here, then they potentially could clear everything. In fact, I wonder to what extent Australia are going to play into getting one of these board clears with the Primordial Glyph this turn, because if they think their chances are good, they'll go Mana Worm, Glyph, and then Cinderstorm or Arcane Explosion, or even Arcane Missiles would all be pretty good picks there.
Okay. You're a dirty high roller, Falk.
Yep.
Just want to live the dream.
Yep. Australia aren't about that life, though. Now, you mentioned that Counterspell's particularly good in this matchup. However, there is still a coin in hand.
There is.
And that's gonna... looks like Geordie wants to play that immediately.
But the thing is, Australia this turn are very scared of a certain mushroom-related gentleman this turn, which the coin blocks, right? Sometimes Counterspell does stop you from playing a minion.
Yep.
And this is one of those cases. Because Fungal Mancer is a nightmare in this position. Divine Shield kills a Mana Worm, or an Armani Berserker, whichever you like, and then there's a value trade on the other side as well.
Still some serious work can be done with this hand, though. Righteous Protector, just the 1/1 can trade into the
Light dims, but
yeah,
we
to make that trade there, and then Corridor Creeper can come down with the Blessed Maul.
Oh yeah, that's key. I hadn't registered that the fact the trade could happen first, then you play the Creeper, then you play the Maul.
Alternatively, Canada could just play their second Righteous Protector and Hero Power this turn and play the Maul next turn and buff even more.
Alternatively, 0 mana 2/5.
Yeah, I mean, that was coming down this turn anyway.
Big fan.
It's just a question of what the weapon does. And Jordu's going to just control this board best he can, which is actually pretty well. Okay, Citizen Napper, stop this next Fungalmancer.
It's a good point.
Simulacrum, Frostnova, Spellbender.
Well, Simulacrum is not a very good card right now. I will go as far as to stick my neck out to say that.
Until they draw the second Mana Worm.
What to do?
Yeah, it has to be Frostnova. Spellbender hits exactly Blessing of Might, but who cares, really? Like, it's not like Blessing of Might is ever going to have an impact on board control, and this is a board control matchup as much as you would just like to go face. And, yeah, that's just kind of game.
The problem is with Primordial Glyph is that even the very best answers, like the the Flame Strikes, the Blizzards, the Arcane Explosions, etc., only clears the board once. And Canada can just play minions over and over and over and over again. It's like, great, you've played Blizzards. I've Hero Powered and have the same board again. Go.
Yep. But Canada still have to consider that now. The Primordial Glyph card is what they will be tunneled on because it's just about the only way they lose this game. They're racing Alaneth from this point, I would imagine, so they don't really care about that. So they'll be considering, what does Meteor do? What does Flame Strike do? What does Blizzard do? What does Dragon's Fury do? Yep. All of these go through their mind.
Oh, they actually did get the second Mana Worm as well. Still not good enough.
Simulacrum would have still been pretty awful.
That said, with the Frostnova and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Australia can do the best they're ever going to do at creating a board this turn. The problem is this board never connects to the face thanks to the 4/3 Divine Shield Taunt on the board.
Correction, the 6/5 Divine Shield Taunt on the board.
There's just no better option this turn though, is there?
Sorry?
Develop the minions, so Mana Worm, Sorcerer's Apprentice, play the Frostnova for 0 mana, I guess play a Primordial Glyph, see if they can get something to allow them to hit the face next turn.
Fireball ping the 5/7 and pass.
But where does that get them? Oh, I guess they can still do the Mana Worm, Sorcerer's Apprentice play next turn.
Right, they're just hoping that the board isn't as aggressive as it was there, and then they find that one turn a little bit later on.
Singapore now 2-1 against Peru on the off-stream game.
This is the point of proceedings. We have very inane arguments over very, very silly things, like what does this Righteous Protector do on the board versus what does it do in my hand? The answer is, in 99.99% of cases, nothing. Nothing in both of those scenarios. It doesn't matter, you've won. But this is just the kind of thing you talk about as a Hearthstone player.
Well, they've decided. Okay, they have decided. I was going to say, they've decided to just hover over the card for a bit. Right, they're playing it.
What they've decided to do is play around randomly generated Meteor with it.
Okay.
Which, again, it's just something trivial that one of the players has brought up and the rest of them have gone, yeah, that's as good a reason as anything I can come up with, let's play it. It's just honestly what it comes down to at this point.
Someday I'll be just like
Final push now from Australia, see what they can get from the Glyph. Is there something that can let them do something next turn? Okay, Blizzard's about as good as it's ever going to get. Oh, Molten Reflection can actually be played this turn with the Frostnova still. It just still doesn't really get them anywhere.
It's a lot of board stall now, though.
Yeah, they got 2 more turns of this.
Actually, no, hang on. So, you know what, I take all that back. What Canada did on the last turn was the opposite of playing around Meteor, right?
You're going to have to talk me through that one.
It doesn't matter. I'm not going to get caught up in that discussion. Forget I said anything.
Okay. I mean, we don't have much else to talk about right now, so...
No. Well, actually, I mean, we kind of do, because now 2 freezes enters into a very, very, very weird world where maybe this is possible, but there still has to be an Alaneth turn in here somewhere, and that Alaneth never gets drawn and played cheaply enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still don't see it.
Citizen Napper would need something like a Frostbolt to finish off the Righteous Protector anyway, to start pushing this damage to the face. They can still get nowhere, they can still get Canada nowhere near Pyroblast range. There are 2 pretty good cards here.
And a Mogashan Warden, which is the correct pick.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say and a Tyrion, but sure, we'll go with that.
I wonder.
Is it? It might be. I don't know. You have to invent a world where some randomly generated card gets through both of your taunts and allows these minions to hit you in the face while simultaneously preventing you from having lethal on the following turn to justify taking Mogashan Warden. And again, someone on Team Canada has come up with that world. And so they play a 4-mana 1/7 taunt over 2 of the best taunt minions in the game.
Now I've seen everything.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I've literally seen everything.
Jordy's having fun, though. That's what's really important.
He's also winning.
Winning is fun.
Okay, I'm calling it. A member of Team Canada said, why didn't we just take the Tara? Because, like, Tarim is good in every situation in this matchup, right? Next turn, Hero Power Tarim. That's just not... It just can't be bad.
Right, but if they took the Tarim... No, I guess...
They wouldn't have been able to play that turn, but they could have played Raid Leader.
Yeah, I was going to say they'd be like 1 taunt minion down, so they'd be taking more immediate face damage on the following turn. But no, they wouldn't, because they'd just play the Tarim this turn. I don't know.
I think...
I just, like, I said it. As soon as it appeared, I was like, they're taking Mogashan Warden. It's just going to happen. Like, someone's going to talk them into it. I would like my 6/3 taunt to be a 3/6 taunt, if at all possible. No, I take it back. I would like my 6/3 taunt to be a 3/7 taunt, if at all possible.
If the Mogashan Warden was still alive, then that would be a 7/1 taunt.
Wonder.
Yeah, I guess there's no punish for taking the mana worm off the board before you do it, right? Makes sense.
So it leaves Citizen Napper with the a 1/3, 3/4. Still 2 taunts in the way. One of them is 7 health now.
Hey, look at that. My 6/3 taunt became a 4/7 taunt. It's even better than what I asked for, because I'm a dummy and forgot how Raid Leader worked.
Maths with Subtle.
Yeah.
Or maths with Raid Leader, rather. Okay, the game's over! Jordude won. That wasn't a close game.
It was not even remotely, no. And, like, I was resisting the urge for the first 3 or 4 turns because you, the Eternal Optimist, kept going, ooh, Arcane Missiles! Ooh, they've got a glyph, they can get more missile. And this would have been my natural instinct, and no. 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 That's all I would have said for that cast if I had things my way, but... That's the feeling of Aggro Mage versus Odd Paladin, is you always feel like you're like 1 good card away from getting back into the game, but then you draw that 1 good card and it's still just nowhere near good enough.
Okay. I'm getting the sense that Sotul needs a few minutes to vent about Aggro Mage for a while. So we're going to give him those few minutes off camera. We'll be back very shortly with the rest of Australia versus Canada. Don't go anywhere. It's Australia versus Canada. The score is 1-1. And next up, we have Canada on the Murloc Mage versus Australia on the Shudderwock Shaman. Now, Sotul, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Murloc Mage should be the favorite here, but Shaman does have some tools they could utilize to sort of stay alive.
Yeah, the problem, as I mentioned briefly before, is that there aren't as many tools as you would like to be able to raise the health of the minions on board for the Murloc Mage. You have a couple of Cold Light Seers, you have Megasaurs sometimes that give you more health, and I believe one Fungal Mancer is in the list that Canada are playing. Yeah, it's only a single copy, so by the time that it gets to the oppressive board size, it's still quite common that Lightning Storm just nukes your board. And then if it's only a 3 mana investment for New Zealand as opposed to 5, or the difference between 5 and 7 over the course of 2 turns, including the overload, that's a big, big difference in terms of what you need to commit to deal with a board. Purple already getting his hair touches per minute ratio up nice and high. This is something I talk about whenever Purple is on camera, because I just can't believe how much this man touches his hair. It's astonishing.
Have you ever asked him about it in an interview?
I haven't.
I guess it just helps him think.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people have little nervous tics and twitches and things that they do with their hands and so on. Not the most unusual one I've ever seen.
Not the best opening hand from Purple here, though. No 1-drop, and Beluga Warrior, the only minion they've got for turn 2. Let's see if that changes.
Job's done.
However, Glacial Shard for Australia, Earthshock. Earthshock beats Cold Light Seer.
Now, this is where you need to make sure that your matchup knowledge is really on point, because Glacial Shard on 1 is something that we saw very strangely actually used in Seat Story by AK Wonder. Played Glacial Shard on 1 against an aggro deck.
Okay.
It's very strange. And then got into a position later on where there was like huge Kobold Scale Main minions and Fungal Mancer minions all over the board, and he couldn't freeze any of them. But in some situations against some decks, it is correct, just because you can kind of then preemptively contest what they're going to play. And the reason I say like your matchup knowledge needs to be on point is like, is anyone really comfortable with like exactly what minions Murloc Mage plays on turn 2 and whether you want a 2-1 in play to contest them? Like, you can definitely think it through once you know what you're dealing with in an open decklist format like this, but it's certainly not instinctive in the ways that the plays against some of the more common aggro decks would be.
And that's exactly the thing. I mean, as you said, it's an open decklist format. There's nothing stopping one of the players from having the decklist up while they're playing, having a look at it. And yeah, Australia decided that's the way to go, and it's sort of paid off for now, as Canada had to use up their entire turn pinging away that Glacial Shard. However, Purple didn't really have anything better to do anyway, as Beluga Warrior isn't the greatest play on turn 2, so now Frosty has one loaded turn where he can take advantage of a tempo lead here, and it's going to be the Mana Tide.
Yeah, I like it. This is kind of why the Glacial Shard was played on 1. It wasn't really in the end about which minions they wanted to deal with, which minions they wanted to deny. It's making Canada ping, right? It seems dumb. Why would you play a Glacial Shard on turn 1 if they can just ping it down? Well, the reason is, if they ping it down, you can always draw 2 cards from your Mana Tide Totem, which is a situation that they would love to be in.
Purple just slamming down the Murloc War Leader, suggesting that, hey, if you deal with it, you deal with it, but there's not actually that many ways to deal with it by turn 3. 1 Glacial Shard already used.
0 mana Zola, okay. I was going to talk through the relative merits of playing a Gluttonous Ooze this turn, because this is also an Alaneth deck. Let's not forget about that. But the Alaneth is much less exploit. Is that even true? It's very different in this deck than it is in Aggro Mage, in that it's used to just refill the board over and over and over and over and over again. It's not a card that just kills you through cumulative burn damage.
Right, and this deck is a lot more full of cheaper minions.
Yes.
Just cheaper cards overall, actually.
Right.
Okay. Now Purple's minions might come out to play. Murloc Tidecaller, Beluga Warrior, and Mana Worm all playable this turn, with Murloc War Leader buffing the Bluegill. It would be able to make that trade into the Mana Tide Totem. but it's all very weak to Lightning Storm.
Yeah, and that's the big downside of the Gluttonous Ooze play on the following turn. If you could find a world where Gluttonous Ooze like reliably contested this Murloc War Leader, I think you might be more tempted to go for it. But, you know, Megasaur plays around it, Cold Light Seer plays around it, Bluegill Warrior plays around it. These are all ways where that 3-3 versus 3-3 challenge just doesn't go down in your favor. So I think holding on to it in the long run is probably better, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that was talked about by Australia that turn.
I was wondering if Canada were going to consider not going all in there and playing around the first day a wee, but no. They've gone for it, and we're almost definitely going to see that Lightning Storm this time.
Are we?
You don't think? They can clear up, if one of the 3 health minions survive, they can clear it up with the Earthshock.
They can.
Seems quite clean to me.
I agree. That does seem like a generally good thing, but if your opponent plays these remaining cards in their hand and their minions,
then Lightning Storm's even better.
Well, more importantly, what are you doing next turn, right? You Lightning Storm this turn, you overload, you're down to 3, your opponent plays some more minions. We've already established you don't want to play Gluttonous Ooze to contest anything.
Okay, so an alternative is the Psionic Chain Gang and the 0-mana Zola to put another Psionic Chain Gang into the hand. So they could follow it with that next turn, and
So
also...
then on turn 5, you Lightning Storm, which then gives you a 4-mana turn with a second 4-mana copy of Saronite Chain Gang in your hand. Bingo.
And hey, it's a lot of stats as well. 0-mana 2-2. It's fine. Oh, that's better though.
There's the punish though.
Okay. Is it better than Fungal Mancer?
It's a good question. It's also not really that much of a punish because you can give +2 health to a bunch of your minions, but you've just developed 3 2-power attacks on the board as Australia, which kind of immediately negates that.
So the Seer, then the Book of Spectres would essentially buff the Mana Worm 2, allowing that to trade with Zola. 2 of the Murlocs can trade into the 2/3s, and then the War Leader can survive as a 3/5. That's one way of, I guess, playing around Lightning Storm a little bit better, but that still loses to Earthshock.
Mm-hmm. You have to Earthshock preemptively in that case, though, but it doesn't really matter that much.
Get complacent. Mushroom power!
Wow. So that is just time to giddy up and push some damage.
But this is a guaranteed board clear with the Lightning Storm and then the Earthshock.
Yes, it is.
Can even Earthshock the 6/4 preemptively, and then Lightning Storm, and potentially have the Zola survive.
It's a good point. It's a great point, actually. I'd spot that. Might have done, given a bit more time. I'll claim I will.
Well, thankfully Australia spotted it.
Yeah.
And now the only important number is the one on the Mana Worm. That is a 3. Zola does survive, and now Australia sort of managed to stabilize their position for now.
Yeah. And crucially, you know, Lightning Storm high rolls aside or not, the Cold Light Seer or, you know, War Leader or Fungal Mancer decision from purple side or not, the crucial turn was the Saronite Chain Gang Zola turn. That is just a much smoother curve than they gave themselves if they had snapped Lightning Stormed in the first place. And you could see they took a risk, right? Like, on the surface, you would say that that turn was risky because what if they Cold Light Seer, what if they Fungal Mancer? Well, they did, and they were still fine.
I mean, the power of Earthshock Lightning Storm in this matchup. We haven't even started thinking about volcanoes yet. Purple almost has to play Book of Spectres here, doesn't he?
Purple's very confused about something.
These Murlocs aren't doing anything.
It seems that he wants to do something and multiple members of his team disagree with it, which is very interesting. It seemed like he was advocating for something, and now it seems like he's not too happy with the play he's been forced to make. These are all very obscure body language reads, by the way. I apologize wholeheartedly to Canada if they're wrong, but this is my interpretation.
Murloc Mage has failed to get the out of control start that it really wants in this matchup. Shadowhawk Shaman still alive, still 16 health. And again, the big difference between Murloc Mage and Aggro Mage is that there's not really the same burst damage in this deck. Yes, there are 2 Fireballs, yes, there are 2 Frostbolts, but that's it. There's no Pyroblast, there's no Life Drinkers.
There's no Primordial Glyphs to fish for extra burn.
Exactly. The Zero Mana Zola has made such a big difference in this game. Just the fact that it was able to come down with the Sound Knight Chain Gang, it was that extra pressure at exactly the time that Australia needed it. Duplicating the vital minion.
I'm very happy with this card, by the way, Nightmare Amalgam.
Interesting.
I believe I tweeted when it was spoiled, just saying, like, I hope it didn't see play because tribal effects, I think, can be quite damaging to the game. Like, tribal effects by nature are quite snowbally and quite oppressive when they're good, and then when they're not good, it's just kind of useless. You're seeing the snowballing side of that right now, yeah. But Nightmare Amalgam is just in the, like, right spot where it's making a couple of decks possible just to add a little bit of extra flavor to the metagame, like Murloc Mage, but it's not like it just universally made tribal decks powerful, which was, you know, a danger with a card like that.
I wonder.
I also wonder, Thrall. I wonder about the Saronite Chain Gang on the previous turn as opposed to the Life Drinker. Because they just left minions on board that kind of got farmed. And it's not like they had a Pyromancer or a Lightning Storm to follow up with. They weren't really setting up for anything. They were just putting a roadblock in the way.
Honestly, I think with the tools that Australia has, it just doesn't make a huge difference. They've got Hagatha available to play next turn.
Yeah.
If Australia really want to, they can Hex the Nightmare Amalgam, so that's a full board clear right now. There aren't that many Punishes available to Canada, and they only have 1 card in hand. Megasol is, I guess, the big one. +1/1.
Goodbye, Fireball. Goodbye, Frostbolt.
Okay, that's good though. The Rockpool Hunter is fine. Rockpool Hunter plus Gentle Megasol give them health, give them +1/+1. They both survive a Hagatha. That's going to be a difficult situation for Frosty to deal with. A Hagatha just isn't good enough. Didn't get the extra health on the Rockpool Hunter. However, 13 damage on the board next turn. If Hagatha does get played as the War Leader survives and has Wind Fury.
You said it's not good enough.
Well, it is. The armor doesn't matter.
What else is?
Is Hex better? Is dealing with the War Leader... The Hex is slightly better, isn't it? Hex on the Murloc War Leader, then it's just a 2/3 with Wind Fury and the 5 attack. That's very close to lethal, though. Because they don't get the health from the Hagatha.
And you still end up having to Hagatha a board that's awkward to Hagatha on the following turn, right? It's not like the 5/4 is getting any smaller right now.
No, you're right. Still not a Volcano in sight.
One Fireball gone, 1 Frostbolt gone as well, and 1 War Leader gone, so a lot of the burst potential of the remaining cards is gone. They're just going to draw minions most of the time.
Okay.
So you can kind of live on the edge here a little bit with your health total if you want to with Australia. I say if you want to, you don't have any choice. Any play you make lives on the edge with your health total this turn.
Yeah.
I do lean towards the Hagatha. I just feel like it was something that had to happen. With +3 is lethal, and there it is. Purple gets over the line. You could see he was pretty upset with his Book of Spectres when it burned 2 spells. But most importantly, that Rockpool Hunter, which was the 1 minion drawn was huge, and in fact probably a lot more important than the other 2 spells being burned.
Well, that was the point I was going to make, is that it did more work just by buffing that War Leader out of Hagatha range.
It allowed him to take something aggressive with the Megasaur, right? Because otherwise you had to take plants, you had to take Divine Shield, you had to take plus health, but he got to take Wind Fury because he already made it a 4/4.
It's not very often that you can say discarding a Fireball and a Frostbolt is a good thing, but on that occasion, yeah, digging deeper into the deck, losing those cards, it was fine.
It wasn't a good thing.
Okay,
still, though.
sure. If the card allowed them to keep the Fireball and Frostbolt and the War Leader, that would be a little bit
right. No. But the alternative world is that they were 2 other minions, right? And that is just better than burning the 2 spells.
Yeah. Well, that is a good score now for Canada, who are 2-1. They did need to get that win somewhat urgently, as the next game coming up is going to be Token Druid versus Control Priest, which is pretty much split down the middle matchup-wise. But after that, it's going to be Sister Nappa on the Odd Paladin versus Purple on the Odd Rogue, which should be Australia favoured. So from where I'm sitting, this next game is potentially the most important game in the series.
It is, and it comes down to Doc Pone as the pilot as well, who I kind of called the wild card of this Canadian team, because I don't want to do a disservice to the guy. He's had great results in limited opportunities to get those great results, but I think when he qualified through Bahamas, he had 1 or 2 little moments of madness. And then at Worlds, I think his tempo rogue play let him down as well. So, there are gaps in his knowledge. I don't think he's a player necessarily on Purple's level, for example, but he is capable of great things. That's why I'm using the term wildcard, because you never quite know game by game which Doc Pone is going to show up.
To be fair, when he's got a whole team of Canadian players behind him, then it's probably going to be the better Doc Pone, right?
That's
because they've got the other players to sort of check over every decision he makes.
Yep. And it's going to be important in this matchup because it's a very skill-intensive matchup, very decision-heavy matchup. Talking about the win rates, I expect, like, real-world examples, I expect Priest to win more games than Druid. But I think it is a 50-50 matchup. And this is something that people sometimes get wrong, is that when you're expressing a matchup statistic, you should be doing it assuming optimal play.
Yep.
And I think Token Druid is one of the most difficult decks in the game to play optimally, which in real world with real flawed human beings gives the edge to Control Priest. But, I think perfect scenario, Theorycraft world, it's a very, very even matchup, maybe even slightly Token Druid favored, but there are so many obvious issues that you run into.
Right, like Pyromancers,
yes.
Psychic Scream.
Yes.
And just the many Duskbreakers, the many forms of AoE that priests have. So, okay, in optimal Token Druid world, what does the Token Druid do to surpass that?
Play a very statistic-based game to start with. Like they're only entitled to have a certain number of those AoEs at any given point, and you have to kind of react to what your hand does. You cycle much quicker than they do. With 2 copies of Ultimate Infestation in your deck. A lot of the time you don't get to use Nourish to draw. A lot of the time you don't necessarily want to use Branching Paths to draw, because when one board sticks, you need to murder them with it, because you're not going to get that opportunity again. If you don't kill them with it on the first turn it sticks, maybe suddenly that gives them the turn where Shadow Visions into Psychic Scream becomes relevant or something like that.
And that's a big issue, because in most matchups, the first board sticks, the Druid can then sort of secure the board with Soul of the Forest, but that's just not an option against Priest that runs not only Psychic Scream, but also Mass Dispel as well.
Yes, and again, that's like the 1-2 punch issue that you run into, right? Like Token Druid basically functions in 2 very simple ways. You go quick, where you just play Violet Teacher go nuts on turn 4, or you play Whispering Woods on turn 4, and then you just say, well, this sticks against you because you have no way of dealing with it, and then I'll put Soul of the Forest on it afterwards. Or there's the go slow method, which is you wait and you do Wood, Soul of the Forest in the same turn, or you do Spreading Plague, Soul of the Forest in the same turn later in the game. The initial problem is that Priest has answers to both of those. They have Wild Pyromancers to stop an early board of just 1/1s. They have Wild Pyromancer into Duskbreaker to deal with, as a small fringe out for, if you get a mid-game position. Because remember, you're a Druid. You're going to have more mana than them. So there's a potential that you can make an 8-mana play when they only have 6 mana.
Right.
But they can still deal that problem. Pyromancer, Coin, Duskbreaker can still do that for 6 mana and counter your 8-mana play. And then if you get all the way into the late game and you're making those final Spreading Plague, Soul of the Forest plays, well, then Psychic Scream can just crush you completely.
Sure. I'm thinking about how, other little ways the Druids can get ahead. So, for example, Violet Teacher could be quite difficult for the Priest to deal with.
Yep.
On the other side of things, though, Twilight Drake can be quite difficult for the Druid to deal with.
Yeah, and that's one of the most underlooked things about Mind Blast Priest, honestly, is that they have just a really good minion package. Like, it's easy to underestimate how good their just straight minion for minion board control is when you consider their curve through, you know, Nausea Cleric, through their 2-drops, and then Twilight Acolytes just taking control of the board early into Twilight Drakes, Cabal Shadow Priest swinging the board later on. Like, they can be in charge of the board come turn 6 with massive amounts of consistency.
Well, I believe we are about to find out which team will take this one, as we do have Token Druid versus Control Priest coming right up. And let's take a look at these opening hands. Wild Growth on one side, Psychic Scream on the other. Does Dogpine even keep that card, though? It's a little bit expensive.
It is. Pyromancers and Dustbreakers can be more important, but again, it really comes down to how the Druid chooses to play the matchup, because some Druids will choose to wait until a very big explosive turn and just make them have the Psychic Scream, especially if you can ramp up so far ahead of them, right? Because as I mentioned, you have an opportunity on your turn 5 or turn 6 to make that 8-mana Soul of the Forest play.
Yep.
Before Canada even have access to Psychic Scream. So it's a scary proposition to keep it, but it really, the initiative is in the Druid's court here. They get to decide how the match is going to be played out.
Yep, and when the Druid has as much ramp as Akumaker has in this opening hand, I mean, this, does it actually get much better than this? Wild Growth, Oaken Summons, Nourish?
Not much, no. Like you said, Violet Teacher is a very key card because, you know, cards like Shadow Word Pain and so on are very much fallen by the wayside in Priest these days.
Right.
You don't see them. They don't have these kind of efficient answers to single threats anymore. They just wait and wait and wait, and then they AoE. There is that Pyromancer, which can be very crucial because that is your cheapest clear option, which means if the Druid does get ahead of you on mana, Pyromancer is your way to keep up.
Well, Pyromancer gets rid of some 1/1s. It doesn't get rid of Violet Teacher herself, though.
No.
As Singapore actually just finished off Peru with a 3-1 score there in the off-stream match. I mean, Wild Growth into Oaken Summons, into Nourish, and then with a second Nourish to draw. This Token Druid hand is about as good as, at least as good as I can envision it. Just need to get, you know, an Ultimate Infestation now, and they're rolling.
That's not bad either.
There's no real need to preemptively play the Pyromancer here, so you can definitely see Dogpome just dumping the Acidic Swampoos. It's no good in this matchup, really. Preemptively have a minion there to start trading into Violet Teacher.
Yeah, it means you have to do 2 damage with your Pyromancer on the following turn, which is still possible.
But it would mean that the Pyromancer gets destroyed. I guess there's Divine Him, so...
Yeah. And now you already see, like, the headache for the Priest, right? Like,
yeah.
Do I use one of my AoE clearing tools to deal with a Violet Teacher before it makes a board that's worth AoEing? Or do I just let her do it and then still have my AoE options in hand? Like, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not. You have to make a decision one way or the other.
Well, the big issue is that, exactly as you said, it's going to require some of this premium removal to deal with it now. But what's the alternative? Coin out Twilight Drake? That would then mean that Duskbreaker doesn't have a dragon in the hand to prop it. Shadow Visions and dig for a Psychic Scream to play later?
Quickly.
I'd love to tell you what these cards are, but they're actually not on our spectator monitors either, so I can't.
Well,
unlucky.
There should be something. Oh, there we go. Okay. Shadow Power Shield materialized in front of us. Obviously, one of the best cards to combo with the Wild Pyromancer.
Yeah. So this is the let it happen plan, and then with the Power Word Shield picked up, gives them all the tools they need to even play around a Power of the Wild kind of plan here from Australia.
They're letting it happen, but honestly, not much is happening.
Yeah, it's just not that scary.
It is 1-1-1.
It is also 2 extra mana though, which is slightly more terrifying. 8-4, no big deal.
Seems a bit of a mismatch. The Twilight Drake has to be tempting again this turn. Even more health because they don't have to use up the coin. Yes, Dustbreaker won't be active. However, they do have Pyromancer plus Powered Shield. If they need a board clear, they can easily get that up to 3. Okay, ended up going with the Dustbreaker regardless. What do you think of that?
It's interesting because, like, you see the hand, you have basically that exact interaction that I talked about once or twice as we were setting this matchup up. Where, yes, Druid has the huge mana advantage. They can use that to make a big Soul of the Forest board unfairly early in the game, but Canada have the response of Pyromancer, Coin, and Dustbreaker afterwards, which would be a full board sweep. The downside is that if you get into a world where Power of the Wild comes down on like the initial tokens and then Soul of the Forest is put on afterwards, that's much harder to deal with. So for the cost of a Dustbreaker, I guess Canada were just fine. Just dealing with it, delaying the problem for a few more turns, giving them time to find Shadow Visions and gain the mana to be able to play Psychic Scream. I said Shadow Visions the first time. I meant to say Psychic Scream both times. I just said 2 different things.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But Canada now having the ability to get themselves well and truly ahead on the board. Doesn't usually make the biggest difference in this matchup, but I guess they're going to need to start killing the Token Druid somehow.
There it is. It's a possibility.
Dogpone can deal with it, though. It would be Dogpone's last available board clears, though. Pyromancer, Powered Shield, Divine Hymn, and I guess Coin or Mind Blast.
Yep. And crucially, that costs a lot of mana and also does a big old chunk of damage to a Twilight Drake to then take it down to a 4/5 or below. So then Australia just reload with an Ultimate Infestation straight after that on the Twilight Drake and regain board control. So I think the Pyromancer plan is something they're okay with. Something they might be less okay with is a Psychic Scream.
Now, we had a chat about Psychic Scream earlier, and I said, hey, they've got Ultimate Infestation, it's not so bad, and you correctly pointed out, you know, drawing a bunch of 1/1s isn't exactly what you want to do with Ultimate Infestation.
Right.
I would say these Wisps will be 0 mana cards when they get drawn. The Treants wouldn't have been, but the Wisps will.
Yep.
And therefore, Dogpone probably doesn't want to give Akumaker the ability to just resummon them for free after an Ultimate Infestation. So he is going to go with the Pyromancer to deal with this set of cards. He's got Psychic Scream for the next set. Pretty good Divine Hymn here as well.
It is, and I think the Divine Hymn's actually crucial here because it's what really stops Australia from taking back ball control, because I think your explanation was spot on, but I would have argued with you if it wasn't for that Divine Hymn, right? If it was 3 other spells that left the Pyro dead and the Twilight Drake at a 4/5, which is what could have happened, then I would have argued for the Psychic Scream, because I would rather my opponent Ultimate Infestation to bad target and drew a bunch of 0 mana 1/1s than Ultimate Infestation to good target and drew some of the really strong cards that they put in their deck themselves. That's just not the reality now because of specifically Divine Hymn being part of the chain with the Pyromancer.
And as a result of that play, I mean, not only are they behind on the board, but Akumaker just sort of left with not much stuff in the hand to do. He's going to cast Ultimate Infestation. But he's still behind this game. He's drawn Scenarios, which is something we've seen a little bit on Token Druid.
Yes.
It's never really caught on in a popular sense. What is this card for?
Ike is a very big advocate for this card. First off, it's very strong in the mirror.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to generate a board and actually go with the play my card strategy, which it's kind of hotly debated still in the Token Druid
The
mirror.
play my card strategy.
Yeah, I mean...
As opposed to the don't play any cards.
Exactly. I mean, those are the 2 strategies in the Token Druid, but they are exactly what they sound like. But Cenarius is actually an aggressive threat, right? Like, it's not like a Power of the Wild or a Savage Roar, where, say, when Spreading Plague comes down, your minions still have 1 health and they die, it's actually +2/+2 to the board, so you can trade much better with opposing minions. This Cenarius slot, though, is something that we're seeing played around with. Jackie Chan, for example, earlier on in Seat Story Cup, was playing Token Druid, which is a remarkably normal deck for him, but he was playing an Onyxia in that spot as opposed to a Cenarius, which is more of a standalone board refill, but much worse in the situation where you've already stuck something to the board.
And also much worse if your opponent is running Spreading Plague.
Yes. Also much worse if you're dead on board and need some 2/2 taunts. Should we go through all the scenarios?
My hand is
If you want.
Okay. Your turn.
I mean, I'd rather point out the fact that Akumaker just lost his 2nd Violet Teacher, so that's it. No
Okay,
more Violet Teacher generation going to happen.
I'm glad you were paying attention because I totally missed that.
Yeah. Still leaving him without all that much to do. He's got Whispering Woods, but doesn't have a Soul of the Forest to back it up this time. I guess Cenarius plus the Spellstone's looking okay, just to summon the 2/2/2s.
Spellstone's only at 4, though, I believe, right?
I actually cannot tell by looking at the Druid Spellstone.
Well, it's just you can see it's just called Jasp as opposed to Gr that it would be if it was upgraded.
Time waits for no one. Who dares?
Ends up being the Cenarius plan anyway. Now suddenly there's a big old pile of damage, and now that Priest is marching their way towards 10 mana themselves.
We're seeing Alexstrasza in hand, 2 Mind Blasts, Holy Fire.
It means Akumaker and Australia are not just solely concerned with making aggressive plays to set up lethal anymore. They actually have to think about protecting themselves as well, and that means sometimes using branching paths to stay alive, and that means less damage output when you do get a board to stick.
I'm amazed at how quickly the Shadow Reaper Anduin came down then, because I kept looking at the Primordial Drake thinking, yeah, but this way pushes more damage. Like, Canada could go face the Twilight Drake, chip away the armor, then Alexstrasza puts them down to 15. I guess the double Mind Blast Holy Fire wouldn't have been lethal the following turn anyway, but...
Primordial Drake's also just an absurdly good card in the matchup.
Sure. But like, the thing is, how many more boards can Akumaker realistically make? 1 Whispering Woods is gone, 1 Soul of the Forest is gone, both Violet Teachers rather have been dealt with. So there's only so many more times that Akumaker can even go wide.
There's only so many more times that Canada can deal with it, and that Primordial Drake is one of them.
Sure. But there's also a Dustbreaker, a Psychic Scream, and a Master Spell that could be used with the Dustbreaker.
Yeah. Psychic Scream doesn't fully solve the problem, though, as discussed. It just delays it.
But I think we're at the point in the game where delaying it is all Doc Prone really needs to do, is he's...
Yeah, no, you might be right.
It's very difficult to argue against the Alexstrasza play next turn, though.
And that's the I think we can argue back and forth about how much do you need a Primordial Drake, how many more AoEs do you need. I think the argument just comes down to it was turn 8, Anduin was green, and it killed a 5/8.
Yep.
You know, like, how much deeper do you have to go?
No, you're right.
Darkness speaks to me.
Taking the time with this one, though. I'm trying to think of arguments for the Primordial Drake in this turn, but it's just it just seems so cut and dry, the Alexstrasza.
I was doing the same, and I was kind of like, well, you Alexstrasza them, they make a big board and force you to Psychic Scream, and then you kind of kill your own Alexstrasza that way. But like, who cares? Honestly, like, it's not enough to talk yourself out of it.
I mean, again, there's Master Spell Dustbreaker. There's no big board that Akumaker can make that doesn't deal with alone.
It's very true.
Is over.
Canada even need to worry about this? I think they just need to start dealing as much damage as possible to compete with Malfurion's armor gain. And to be fair, there is a lot of armor gain available for Australia. Every turn they gain the 3, they've got the branching paths. There's another Oaken Summon somewhere in the deck. There's another branching path somewhere in the deck.
Yeah, and this is another way where I have seen Token Druids win this game.
Fatigue?
Yes.
Yeah? Well, Psychic Scream...
Exactly, because at some point, you get to break the fatigue by setting up a board that they just can't leave alive, and then they have to Psychic Scream it, and then, you know, we talked about how important it is to Ultimate Infestation and draw all those 0 mana 1/1s back again. Well, you don't have to do that. You can just leave them there in your deck and win the game by armoring up every turn.
I am very surprised that Canada just worked so hard to clear up that board. Is that an indication that they are thinking about fatigue?
It might be. I mean, it doesn't happen often, honestly, but it's something to think about.
Like if they're thinking we need to just deal with the minions on the board without playing Psychic Scream, so start doing it now and just eventually win the game.
Yeah, and I think honestly it's a good breakdown from this point because Alex has been used. Akamaker is still at 30, and there's still 2 unused branching paths, which means they're at 54 plus 3 a turn from the hero power.
Right.
You just can't deal 54. I don't think you can do it with the remaining cards in your deck just with pings and mind blasts.
Death is eternal.
So yeah, you have to think about it now. Here we go.
Get comfortable, everyone. This game's not quite over yet. There's only so much work Anduin can do now that Rasa doesn't exist in Standard.
Darkness speaks.
The problem now is that there aren't many cards in Canada's hand that aren't actually just very important for laying out a fatigue game plan, right? Like Primordial Drake could be very important in a fatigue game plan. Dustbreaker, Master Spell, that combination could be very important in a fatigue game plan. Acolyte of Pain is obviously very important in a fatigue game plan for inverse reasons entirely. You're just not going to play it. And then again, Twilight Acolyte, Cabal Shadow Priest can actually be something that comes into play even on like a Arcane Tyrant that can be like the last minion played in the game that you can't deal with or something. So yeah.
There's no real reason to hold on to
play
these
your Mind Blasts,
right?
yeah. They're done with.
If it's played with 2 hero powers, then it's done its job. That's 9 damage, 10 with a Cleric.
Not quite true. They might still hold on to the second one. I actually expect they will do because the Mind Blast still refreshes the hero power, which is still important for your board control plan, right?
Sure.
Because being able to ping and then play a Mind Blast and ping again is a very cheap way to spend 6 mana on 4 damage that controls the board.
But again, we're only looking really at, okay, so there's 1 Whispering Wood, there's 1 Soul of the Forest, obviously.
Yeah.
They've got Master Spell and Dustbreaker to deal with that. So the only other threats we're really looking at here are the Arcane Tyrants, a Spreading Plague, which, you know, Canada are going to play around. They're going to make sure that Spreading Plague is never summoning more than 1 minion.
Yeah.
So at worst, that's 2 4/4s and a 1/5.
Right. Ping, Mind Blast, ping, kills a 4/4 though.
Yep.
Well, this is fun. That sounded really sarcastic. I was entirely earnest.
I know you love Token Druid, don't you?
I really do like Token Druid, yeah.
It's fun to talk about all of the decks that you dislike, like Aggro Mage, Big Spell Mage, and Quest Priest. But Token Druid, I can remember you saying a while back that you find that the Token Druid mirror in particular really fascinating.
One of my favorite matchups of all time, yeah. So yeah, they held on to the Mind Blast for 1 more turn, trying to find themselves a few more options, but they really just didn't. They had to go for it there because, as you said, I've talked about all the cards that they can't play because they're important for various reasons. Also, they just don't really want to be playing more minions because, as you said, that then gives a big Spreading Plague for the Australian team. Philippines, as you saw there, is getting a 1-0 lead up against Vietnam off stream as well.
Lorinda will be happy to see that. Philippines, one of his teams.
Yes, indeed.
And his teams haven't done so well so far in this tournament.
No, I believe he's currently only beating me in the caster standing.
Oof, it's not a good spot to be in.
No.
Death is eternal.
Is that gonna make her ever just drop a 5-mana 4/4 here? Oh, he's gonna go for the Whispering Woods.
A tangled web.
With no Soul of the Forest in hand. Interesting. Oh, so this is because Canada need to play either a Primordial Drake or a Dustbreaker or a Pyromancer to deal with these. And that means that Spreading Plague next turn will be 2 1/5s in addition to the Arcane Tyrants.
They also, on a surface level, just needed to play a card that turn if they want to get usage out of all the cards remaining in their deck. But we have certainly seen situations where Token Druids have just burned cards off the top of their deck rather than play any cards. Particularly, again, a very famous at this point Token Druid mirror, DreamHack Austin, I want to say?
Yeah, that's right. Twilight Drake was the best of... sorry, Primordial Drake was the best of Canada's answers to that board there, still playing around Spreading Plague. It's now actually a worse board for Australia to play Spreading Plague on, but...
Right.
Oh, going to hold on to this Arcane Tyrants for a little bit longer, okay.
Mm-hmm.
What are they waiting for?
They're waiting for a position where, you know, it's about making that one turn that's just too overwhelming, so the Dokpone has to Psychic Scream, and those Arcane Tyrants are a key part of that, right? It's just 0 mana threats they can play extra, because they might get a 2-minion Spreading Plague. In a real dream world, maybe they get a 3-minion Spreading Plague, but they're not going to get a Spreading Plague that fills the board. So those Arcane Tyrants then become crucial to like drop down alongside that and say to the opponent, okay, Psychic Scream this, or I am going to Savage Roar, Power of the Wild, and kill you next turn.
I just don't know why Canada would suddenly stop playing around Spreading Plague.
They wouldn't.
Right. And so Akumaker's going to struggle to get a better Spreading Plague than this. That being said, the Twilight Drake has been thrown down now.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason why they are forced to play minions in this spot is because they're just burning cards. If they don't, how important that is, you can stop and argue about.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2 Spreading Plagues, so 2 Scarabs plus 2 Arcane Tyrants. Canada can play Cabal Shadow Priest to take one of the plagues, use the minions to trade with the other, and then Akumaker can use all the Savage Roars that he wants. Those Tyrants are still going to have to trade before anything goes to face.
Yep.
Interesting that Akumaker still runs Ironwood Golem in his Token Druid. I thought that was mostly out of favor now.
A tangled web.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed it myself. It's buried so deep down the list that I didn't even register it as a 4-drop. It's just a single copy, 2 teachers, 1 Ironwood Golem.
Well, that used to be standard.
Yeah, there's a little flirtation with Blade Masters as well for a while.
Just as there is currently with Malygos Druid, actually.
Yeah.
Do you like to play with fire?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's as you said, Canada had to play something, and so they did, and then dealt with it. Funny that we were referring to Pyromancer as one of the most important tools in the deck earlier on, and this is what it comes to.
Yeah.
Alright, best play possible. Spreading Plague, Arcane Tyrants, Soul of the Forest as well. That does make things a little more tricky for Dokpone, actually. Yes, they can still take one with Cabal Shadow Priest, but they can't deal with the other 1/5 as easily.
Yeah, but it's just enough of a roadblock, right? Like, they put 12 health of Taunt on the board, which with 3 minions in play, they're not dying through that. No. So the overreaction that Australia have needed to provoke in this match is just crucial because of the
All right.
Psychic Scream that they need to force out, and as soon as they see that answer, Australia said, okay, there's no way we now get you to cast Psychic Scream, so therefore we always lose on Fatigue, and we just have to give it up and hand you guys the series.
Yep, Canada takes a great 3-1 victory there after losing a favourable matchup right back in game 1. They had the Even Warlock versus the Cube Warlock. They lost that, but still managed to take it away. I think they came into this series looking very favoured, and they pulled it off in the end.
Yeah, but you can see why, when you asked me about that matchup early on, I was very quick to make the distinction between real-world examples and optimal play examples, right? Like, look how complicated that matchup looked on the surface, just looking down. It's so many options for both players on any given turn, and then it just stalemates to this weird position where you just have to outplay your opponent, really. Like, one of you is going to be unfavored going into a fatigue position. It's usually the Druid, and it comes down to, can you engineer that position to make your opponent do something they don't want to do? And that does not feel easy from the Druid side, but it feels possible, which is why I wonder, you know, in Galaxy Brain world, can the Druid kind of squeak out a couple of extra percentage points in that matchup?
It's tricky. Again, the Priest just has all of the removal tools in the world. Something that we didn't even really start to talk about until the end of that matchup was sort of the downside of the Psychic Scream, because we talked about, yeah, okay, it sucks having to draw all the 1/1s, etc., but there was a very real chance that game went into fatigue, and it would have done had Akamaker not just conceded. And right from the beginning, Canada were playing around that possibility by just not playing the Psychic Scream.
Yeah, and of course it's it's why you rarely see Mind Blast games go to fatigue, even though it is a deck that can stalemate with several other decks. It just never really gets to that point because Mind Blast Priest just isn't really allowed to play it to that point because they just shuffle cards back into their opponent's deck. So they have to set up a win condition for themselves.
Let's remind ourselves one more time of how this series went. Again, started with the Cube Lock versus the Even Warlock, where Australia, they played that matchup very well.
And they won it twice.
Essentially.
Very, very happy to see that. We did have an unfortunate disconnect where Australia were a long way ahead, but justice prevailed. They did come out with the win. But then from there, it was all very, very downhill indeed. Favoured matchup for the Paladin, favoured matchup for the Mage, and then, you know, a debatable matchup, but one where Dotpone and Canada handled it very, very well and were able to come out with a 3-1 victory, which, as you mentioned, was crucial because then that remaining matchup at the end was Odd Paladin versus Odd Rogue, which probably would have seen us going back 3-2 the other way.
Should we have a chat with Purple?
Why not?
I want to see what he has to say about this series. Hey, Purple, congratulations on your victory versus Australia. Talk to us about that last match, the Token Druid versus the Control Priest. What was going through your mind as you played that one out?
That game was over like 10 turns ago. We've got a fortunate draw of being able to deal with Soul Wisp, and the first wave was gone, and then we had already assembled the second, the wave of killing the second wave, and once there were 3 cards ahead of us between the Nourish and the UI, we could have drawn, and then we just picked up more resources. The game took a while, but realistically, the game was probably over by turn 8, maybe about. You played Scenarios, we played Anduin. That was about all she wrote. The rest was just making sure we just didn't make any major oopsies.
Talk to me about Murloc Mage over Aggro Mage or even Control Mage. Like when bringing an aggressive Mage deck, why Murloc Mage instead of the outright Aggro Mage?
So the Murlocs are really punchy, and there's cards such as like War Leader and Cold Light Seer that end up dealing a lot of damage, and a lot of decks just kind of have a plan against the secret package, like Hunter has the Egg for explosive ruins, or its counterspell's just bad against half the decks in the game. The Fish People are just a very consistent way of beating people up.
Yep, the Fish People are pretty good at doing that, indeed. Purple, you guys weren't able to take your first victory last week, but I'm curious as to if your team learned a lot from your first series that sort of brought you into the second week.
Yeah, I mean, we came to the conclusion that we're still playing Hearthstone, and sometimes we're not going to win. We have a great team, all 4 of us. I think we're working hard towards it. Last week was it started off bad against like a very good Czech team who had very good draws, Q order, etc. against us, and sometimes it's not going to work out for us. Big lesson was just get down to earth and work hard towards the next week's.
Glad to hear that, Purple. Congratulations on your victory. Go ahead and enjoy it. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
They are still playing Hearthstone. It's a good point. Anything can happen in Hearthstone. Also, they were against a very good team last week, so we can't exactly hold that against them.
Yeah, I'm just very pleased that Purple answered my question at a level that I could understand.
The fish people.
It's like, so you see, Murlocs are actually quite punchy, and they hurt quite hard when you play a war leader on them. It's like, yes, Purple, this all makes sense. This was the big moment in game number 1, though. I was kind of freaking out off that second Kobold draw, buffing both of those Spellstones immediately. The second one was good, but that first one was essential because it was pretty much their only out to nicely be able to deal with that Mountain Giant.
Yeah, it just all went right for Ginger Ninja from there, taking advantage of the Void Lords, etc., and then eventually slamming down Doom Guards and winning the game. Next up, though, things started to go right for Complexity as this matchup just looked unwinnable from Australia's side.
For Complexity?
For Complexity? From Complexity, the Jordan himself.
I'll take it. I think you were right the first time. Things went beautifully for Complexity from this point. But yeah, more importantly, there you go. The punchy fish people, as Purple christened them, were able to pick up the win. And it was a Book of Spectres that on the surface looked quite terrible with a Fireball and a Frostbolt being burned, but it was all kind of irrelevant when that third draw was the Rockpool Hunter, which then secured a more aggressive pick from the Gentle Megasaur, and then the second Gentle Megasaur just had to hit that +3 attack, 3 out of 10, for lethal on the following turn.
Yeah, Purple looked very happy with those final attacks there indeed. Finally was the Control Priest versus the Token Druid, and as Purple said, this game was over a lot earlier than it looked like it was over. They had secured the tools that they needed in order to clear the second wave of Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest. And according to Purple, that's all that mattered though.
Yeah, no, I think he's right. You saw what Akumeka, or what New Zealand tried to do, where like they played their Whispering Woods to try and get rid of that second wave clear, right? Like they'd given credit for it being in hand, and they said, well, maybe their second wave clear involves a Dustbreaker, and they have to use it here, and then maybe we can force that final board. So there are tiny, tiny things that can maybe counteract what Purple was saying, but of course he is a much blunter man than I am, and he's probably spot on in his assessment that game was over for several turns.
Yep. It seems as though that was the case. Psychic Screams weren't even required, so didn't have to think too much into the late game. But there you go. Canada takes down Australia. We still have 2 more series coming up today, though, so don't go anywhere. More Hearthstone Global Games coming up.